Sable Wren had been an Ulvane for 140 years, and in all that time she had never once wanted to turn a ship around before she'd finished a job. She wanted to now. The salvage tug Coldwater Det hung 400 kilometers off Outpost Kessel-Nine, engines idling, and every one of Sable's nerve lines. The long, pale filaments that ran under her skin from scalp to spine, the reason her species could feel a lie forming in someone's throat before they spoke it, were screaming at a pitch she didn't have a word for. Not fear, exactly. Fear had a shape. This didn't. "You're doing the thing," said Reyes without looking up from the console. "What thing?" "The thing where your face goes flat and your little glow wires start doing figure eights. You did it before we docked at the plague relay in the Vantis belt. You did it right before that reactor breach on the Halcyon job. I've learned to take it seriously." "Then take it seriously," Sable said. "Turn us around." Reyes finally looked over. He was human, early 50s, silver starting to win the fight in his beard, the kind of tired that came less from sleep debt and more from 30 years of picking through the wreckage other people's decisions had left behind. He'd flown salvage since before Sable was born, and in the 2 years she'd crewed with him, she'd learned he only got that particular, still, careful look on his face when something actually worried him. He had it now. He just wasn't going to admit it out loud yet. "We got a contract," he said. "Kessel-Nine went dark 11 months ago. Company wants their research data back or proof it's not recoverable before they write the whole station off the books. That's it. That's the job." "The job," Sable said, "is sitting 400 kilometers from a stretch of space that doesn't have a name because nobody who studies it stays sane long enough to name it, and you're calling that routine." "I'm calling it Tuesday," Reyes said, which was a very human thing to say and didn't actually answer anything. The third member of their crew drifted in from the aft corridor on 6 legs that moved like a conversation nobody could quite follow. Over, under, across, never in the order you expected. Cor Amis was Threll, a species that built its cities upside down inside hollow asteroids and considered up a matter of ongoing personal opinion. Cor didn't have nerve lines like Sable didn't feel wrongness the way she did, but Cor had spent 40 years as a structural engineer, taking apart things that other engineers had declared impossible to take apart. And Cor had a nose, figuratively, since Threll didn't have noses, for structures that had died wrong. "Life support's still running over there," Cor said, 4 of its eyes fixed on the readout, 2 more still watching the corridor behind it out of old habit. "Full atmosphere, full gravity, reactor output nominal. Whatever happened to that crew, it wasn't a systems failure." 11 months, Sable said. "Full life support for 11 months with nobody answering hails." "Somebody's paying for that power," Reyes said quietly. "Or something is." That was the first time Sable heard him say something out loud without immediately following it with a joke, and that scared her more than the readings did. The thing about the hollow, and everyone in the Coldwater Det's line of work called it that now, though the survey chart still listed it under a string of numbers nobody used, was that it wasn't a place, not exactly. It was a stretch of space maybe 11 light minutes across where the background felt wrong. Ships flew through worse. Ships flew through debris fields and radiation belts and the kind of gravitational shear that turned hulls into confetti, and pilots complained about all of it in the same bored professional tone. Nobody used that tone about the hollow. Every species that had ever sent a crewed vessel through it came back with the same complaints, dialed to different intensities depending on how sensitive their particular nervous system was to things that didn't behave the way things were supposed to. The Ashkeen, who navigated by scent memory across 4 dimensions of smell humans didn't have words for, came out of the hollow unable to smell anything for weeks, as if the inside of their own skulls had been sanded flat. The Threll, normally imperturbable, reported a specific and consistent hallucination. The conviction, for the entire transit, that they were upside down relative to everyone else on the ship, including other Threll, including the ship itself. And the Ulvane, Sable's people, whose whole biology was built around reading the emotional undercurrent of a room the way other species read facial expressions, came out of the hollow reporting something they'd never been able to properly translate into any other species' language. The closest anyone had gotten was, "It feels like the universe forgot we were supposed to be here, and hasn't finished deciding what to do about it. Humans, for their part, reported headaches, some nausea. A few said they got a metallic taste in the back of their throat. Fleet Medical had run 4 separate studies trying to explain the discrepancy and produced 4 separate sets of findings that all essentially amounted to a shrug in scientific language. Kessel-Nine had been built at the edge of the hollow 11 years ago. A joint research station, 6 species on rotating crews, funded by a consortium that wanted to understand what the hollow actually was before somebody's colony ship wandered into it by accident. For 9 years it had produced careful, cautious, occasionally frightening data. Then 11 months ago it had gone silent, all at once, mid-transmission, and every automated recovery beacon the consortium had sent afterward had simply stopped broadcasting the moment it got within range. The Coldwater Det was not the first ship sent to find out why. It was the 4th. The first 3 had returned findings that ranged from nothing at all to reports so garbled the consortium's own analysts couldn't agree on what language they'd been filed in. "We do the boring thing," Reyes said, standing up from the console, rolling one shoulder like it ached, which it probably did. Get the black box data, get anybody who's alive, get out. We do not explore. We do not investigate. We are not main characters in anybody's mystery today. You say that every time, Core said, and it has never once been true. This time it's true, Reyes said. I'm too old for it not to be true. Sable said nothing because her nerve lines were still doing the thing, the flat, still figure 8 thing, and some part of her, the old animal part, the part that had kept Ulvain alive on their homeworld long before they'd built ships, was telling her, very calmly, that Reyes was wrong, and that this was going to be exactly the kind of day none of them walked away from unchanged. She didn't say it out loud. There wasn't a version of saying it that would have changed the itinerary. Reyes pulled up the consortium's last transmission logs while they closed the remaining distance, scrolling through 11 months of increasingly desperate automated queries that nobody on Kessel-Nine had ever answered. Sable watched over his shoulder, her nerve lines still rolling with that low, directionless unease, and found herself reading the timestamps the way some people read epitaphs. Day 180, Reyes read aloud, mostly to fill the silence. Consortium sends a routine data pull request. No response. Day 181, same. Day 185, they escalate to a priority flag. Still nothing. Day 210, they send an actual person, a courier ship, small crew, in and out, no salvage gear, just there to physically retrieve a data drive. He scrolled further. Courier ship's transponder cuts out 4 hours after docking. No further transmissions of any kind for 6 days. Then the transponder comes back online. Ship undocks, returns to consortium space. He stopped scrolling. Nobody was aboard when it arrived. Nobody, Core repeated. Full fuel reserves untouched. Life support still running. Crew quarters made up like nobody'd slept in them. The ship just came home empty, on autopilot 6 days late, and nobody at the consortium wanted to be the one to explain that in a report, so they buried it and sent ship number 2 instead. What happened to ship number 2? Sable asked, already suspecting she wouldn't like the answer. Ship number 2 never came back at all, Reyes said. Ship number 3 made it as far as the outer marker buoy, sent one garbled transmission, and then reversed course and burned every gram of fuel it had getting back to consortium space at max thrust. Crew debriefs from that one are sealed. Medical leave for all 4 of them indefinite. He set the display down slowly, like it had gotten heavier while he was reading it. We're ship 4, and the consortium didn't think that history was relevant to share with us before we signed the contract, Core said, something dry and pointed in its usually flat tone. The consortium, Reyes said, has never once in the history of consortiums told a salvage crew everything before they signed. That's not new information. That's Tuesday. But his hand, Sable noticed, had drifted back to the grip of his sidearm, resting there without drawing it, the way a person rests a hand on something familiar, right before they stop pretending the day is ordinary. They docked 40 minutes later. The airlock cycled with a soft, ordinary hiss, and the outpost's internal atmosphere read clean, breathable, temperature-controlled, humidity at a level that suggested someone had been actively maintaining it, not just letting automated systems idle along on inertia. That detail bothered Sable more than anything the sensors had shown from a distance. Automated systems failed in specific, predictable ways over 11 months. This felt tended. The corridor beyond the airlock was dark except for a strip of emergency lighting along the floor, casting everything in a low amber that made even Reyes's face look unfamiliar. Somewhere deeper in the station, something was humming. Not an alarm, not machinery exactly, just a low, even tone that Sable's nerve lines picked up before her ears did. "Life signs?" Reyes asked, voice pitched low, without him seeming to decide to lower it. Core's sensor cluster swept the corridor. "One. Just one that I can find. Deck 4 near the primary research bay. Human biosignature. Alive. One?" Sable repeated. "Out of a crew complement of 42. One," Core confirmed. Reyes exhaled slowly through his nose, and Sable felt something in him settle. Not relief, nothing that clean, but the particular steadiness humans seemed to manufacture out of nothing when a situation got bad enough to stop being frightening and start being a problem to solve. "Let's go find out what happened to the other 41, he said, and started walking. The station told its story in pieces, the way abandoned places always did, and none of the pieces made sense on their own. In the first common area they passed through, a chessboard sat mid-game on a low table, pieces frozen in a configuration Core's onboard game logic flagged as unresolvable. Not a stalemate, not a checkmate, just a board state that, according to the rules of chess as understood by every species who played it, should not have been reachable through any legal sequence of moves. Sable stood over it for almost a full minute before Reyes gently steered her onward. Further in, a whiteboard in what had clearly been a break room was covered edge to edge in handwriting, mostly human. Some of it in the looping consonant clusters of Threll script, one corner in the bioluminescent pigment notation the Ashkeen used when they didn't have proper ink. Most of it was mundane. Duty rosters, a running tally of some game involving points nobody had labeled, a badly drawn cartoon of someone's pet. But near the bottom, in a different, more hurried hand, someone had written a single line and underlined it 3 times. "It's not that it's dangerous. It's that it's bored of us. Don't let it get interested." Nobody said anything about that for a while. Before the medical bay, they passed through what had clearly been Kessel-Nine's primary mess hall, and Sable stopped walking without quite deciding to. The tables were set. Not cleared, not abandoned mid-meal. Set the way a table gets set in the calm, unhurried minutes before people sit down to eat. Cutlery aligned, drinking vessels placed at careful angles, a scattering of place cards written in at least 3 different scripts marking who was meant to sit where. 42 place settings. 42 chairs. Nobody in any of them, and a fine, undisturbed layer of dust over everything that suggested this table had been set once, a very long time ago by the standards of an 11-month absence, and never touched again. "Someone set this for a meal that never happened," Core said, all 6 eyes moving slowly across the room, cataloging. "Or a meal that happened somewhere else," Reyes said. He'd picked up one of the place cards, turning it over in his fingers. The name on it was Threll, one of the station's structural engineers according to the manifest Core had pulled earlier. Or a meal that happened and everyone who ate it just didn't need chairs anymore. Sable's nerve lines twisted at that, sharp and sudden, and she realized with a lurch that Reyes hadn't meant it as dark humor. He'd meant it literally, and some instinct in him. The same instinct that had kept a salvage engineer alive for 30 years of picking through worse wrecks than this one, had already started sketching out an answer none of them wanted to hear confirmed. They didn't linger in the mess hall. Nobody suggested it out loud, but all 3 of them found themselves walking a little faster afterward, and Sable noticed Core had angled 2 of its eyes permanently backward, watching the way they'd come. A habit she'd never once seen the engineer display in 2 years of shared contracts. Further along the corridor, past a stretch of quarters with doors standing open onto rooms that had clearly been left in a hurry. Blankets thrown back, personal effects scattered, one boot sitting alone in the middle of a floor with no partner anywhere in sight. They came to a long viewing gallery that ran the length of the station's spine. It should have looked out onto stars. Instead, the reinforced windows showed a slow, syrupy dark that didn't quite match the black of open space, a darkness with a texture to it, faint variations of density that made Sable's eyes want to slide away every time she tried to focus on them directly. Someone had covered most of the windows with whatever they could find. Sheets, tarps, in one case what looked like an entire mattress wedged upright against the reinforced glass, leaving only a single meter-wide gap uncovered near the gallery's far end. Somebody didn't want to look at that, Reyes said quietly. Or didn't want it looking back, Core said. They found the first body, no, not a body, that was the wrong word. And it took Sable several seconds standing in the doorway of the medical bay to understand why the word wouldn't sit right. What they found was a set of ashkeen robes, laid out flat on an examination table, empty, arranged with the careful precision of someone folding laundry, every fold crisp, every seam aligned. No remains inside them. No blood, no residue, nothing that suggested violence. Just an empty set of robes that someone had at some point very deliberately smoothed flat. Core, Sable said. Scan says one life sign on the whole station. Correct. Then who folded these? Core didn't answer, and for a species that always answered, that was worse than any answer could have been. They kept moving because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing, though nobody articulated it that way out loud. Sable's nerve lines had stopped doing the flat figure-8 thing and started doing something new, something she didn't have a memory to compare it to. A slow rolling wave, like her whole nervous system was being stirred gently by a spoon. You're doing the new thing now, Reyes said. I know. Is the new thing better or worse than the old thing? I don't know yet, Sable said honestly. It doesn't feel like fear, it feels like... She searched for it. It feels like being looked at by something that hasn't decided if you're food or furniture. Reyes's jaw tightened, and his hand found the grip of the sidearm at his hip, without him seeming to notice he'd done it. They found the second sign of life. Not a body, not robes, but a video log, playing on a loop on a terminal in what had been the station's primary observation deck, a wide curved window looking out over a stretch of stars that, Sable noted with her nerve lines twisting harder, did not seem to be moving the way stars should move relative to a stationary structure. The log showed a human woman mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, sitting in the observation deck's single chair with the kind of loose, unhurried posture of someone recording something she didn't expect anyone to watch for a long time. Day 211, she said to a camera that must have been mounted somewhere above the console. Dr. Priya Okonkwo Reyes, Station Chief Researcher, for whoever finds this and whoever survives long enough to need it. I'm going to try to explain this as calmly as I can because I've noticed the calmer I explain it, the more of it actually makes sense once it's out of my head. So, bear with me. Reyes had gone very still. Sable noticed it and filed it away without understanding it yet. The hollow isn't empty, the recording continued. We knew that going in, obviously, that's why we built the station, but I don't think any of us, Threll, Ashkeen, me, any of us, understood what not empty actually meant until we'd been sitting on its doorstep for 200 days. There's something in there. I don't know what to call it because I don't think it is even the right pronoun. It might not be one thing. It might be a lot of things that only look like one thing from where we're standing, the way a crowd looks like a single organism from high enough up. But whatever it is, it's... She paused, visibly hunting for the word. It's paying attention. To us. And I don't think it's used to things that pay attention back. Sable felt her nerve lines still completely, every filament along her spine going rigid and quiet, the way prey goes quiet right before it decides whether to run. Everyone processes it differently, the recording went on. The Threll started reporting spatial disorientation almost immediately, and it got worse the longer they stayed. Not random, though, that's the thing, it wasn't random, it was responsive. It got worse specifically when they were afraid of it getting worse. The Ashkeen lost their sense of smell in stages, and every stage lined up almost exactly with moments when they'd been actively, consciously trying to use scent to understand what was happening to them. It's like... Another pause. Dr. Okonkwo Reyes rubbed her eyes with the heel of one hand, and for the first time, the exhaustion in her voice showed all the way through. It's like it's mirroring back whatever you bring to it. You come at it with fear, it gives you something to be afraid of. You come at it trying to understand it, it takes away the specific tool you were using to try. It's not malicious, I don't think. I think it might just be curious in a way that happens to be catastrophic for anyone it's curious about. She looked directly into the camera then, and something in her expression made Sable's whole body go cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The humans are the strange case, Dr. Okonkwo Reyes said. We're the only crew who haven't lost anyone yet. Not because we're braver or tougher or any of the things people like to say about us in the reports that always go around after something like this. I've been trying to figure out why, and I think... She laughed, short and disbelieving, like the idea embarrassed her even as she said it. I think it's because we get bored of things. All of us. It's practically a design flaw. You put a human in a room with something incomprehensible and terrifying for long enough, and somewhere around day 30, instead of staying appropriately afraid of it forever the way you'd expect a sane species to, we start getting used to it. We start making jokes about it. We start playing chess near it. We stop giving it our full, undivided, escalating attention, because our brains are apparently incapable of sustaining maximum existential dread for more than about 3 weeks before they get restless and start looking for something else to focus on, like whether the coffee's gone bad or whose turn it is to do dishes. She shook her head slowly, and I think that's the one thing it doesn't know what to do with. Everyone else keeps paying attention to it, keeps feeding it that attention, keeps escalating, and it escalates right back, matching them. And we just stop. We get bored of the terrifying, incomprehensible thing at the edge of the universe, the way we get bored of everything eventually, and it doesn't seem to have anything in its playbook for a species that just shrugs and goes back to arguing about whose turn it is to do the dishes. The recording ended there, cutting to static, and the terminal looped it back to the beginning without pause. Nobody spoke for almost a minute. Then Core's sensor cluster gave a soft, involuntary click. The Threll equivalent, Sable had learned over 2 years, of a held breath finally released, and it said slowly, Day 211. There are more logs in this queue. 640 of them. The most recent is dated 4 days ago. 4 days, Reyes repeated. Someone's been recording 4 days ago. Play the most recent one, Sable said, before she'd fully decided to. The terminal obliged. The image that resolved was the same observation deck, the same curved window, but the woman in the chair looked different now, leaner, her dark hair cropped short and uneven like she'd cut it herself without a mirror, her posture no longer merely tired but settled into something almost peaceful, the particular stillness of someone who had stopped bracing for the next blow because the blows had stopped coming, or because she'd simply run out of places inside herself to flinch. Day 340, she said, and her voice had changed too, quieter, drier, with an odd private humor threaded through it that hadn't been there in the earlier recording. If anyone's watching this in order, hi, it's me. I'm still here, and I want to note for the record that I have now survived alone on this station longer than I lived with my last roommate, before we mutually agreed the apartment wasn't big enough for both of us. Kessel-Nine and I are doing better than that relationship did, which either says something encouraging about me or something deeply troubling about my taste in cohabitants. She rubbed at her eyes, a gesture Sable now recognized from the earlier log, an old tic worn into a new kind of exhaustion. I've stopped trying to leave. I want to be clear, that's not resignation, it's math. Every escape attempt for the first 4 months made things worse. The ship reacts to being wanted, I think, the same way it reacts to being feared, like wanting is just fear wearing a nicer coat. So I stopped wanting to leave, on purpose, the same deliberate way you'd stop picking at a wound so it can close. And it worked. Nothing's tried to visit me in 6 weeks. A pause, and something flickered behind her eyes that might have been grief, or might have been something stranger. I still set the table sometimes. I know how that sounds. I set it for everyone who isn't here anymore, and then I sit down alone and eat. And I think it's the most boring thing I could possibly do with an evening, sitting alone eating cold rations across from 41 empty chairs, and I think that's exactly the point. Boring is the whole point. Boring is the only spell that's ever worked on this thing. She looked directly into the camera, and even 11 months removed through a recording, Sable felt the weight of that look land somewhere behind her sternum. If my brother ever gets this contract, and knowing him, and knowing how the consortium tends to route family conflicts of interest straight into the file of whoever's dumb enough to volunteer, he will. Tell him I'm not scared. Tell him I got bored instead and it turns out that's stronger. Tell him to bring cards. We're going to need something to do while we wait to see if it gets bored of us too. The recording ended, and this time the terminal didn't loop it. It simply went dark, waiting, as though it too understood that whatever came next wasn't going to be for playback. Reyes, Sable finally said very carefully. Okonkwo Reyes. Yeah, Reyes said, and his voice had gone rough in a way she'd never heard from him. She was my sister. Sable's nerve lines went utterly, painfully still. You didn't say, she said. I didn't know if she was still. He stopped. Started again. The consortium doesn't release crew manifests to salvage contractors, privacy regs. I found out she was posted here the same day I took this job, and I took the job specifically because of that. And I didn't tell either of you because I didn't want you making decisions about how careful to be based on whether or not this was personal for me. He looked at the frozen frame of his sister's face on the terminal, exhausted and calm and 11 months old. It was always going to be personal. Core's sensor cluster swiveled toward the corridor beyond the observation deck, all 6 eyes suddenly sharp. The one life sign, it said. It just moved. It's coming this way. Reyes was already moving before Core finished the sentence, and Sable followed, her nerve lines rolling with that same slow spoon-stirred sensation, stronger now, close enough that it had a texture to it, almost a rhythm. Almost, she realized with a lurch that made her stumble. Almost a heartbeat that wasn't her own. They found her in the corridor outside the primary research bay, and for one terrible half-second Sable's mind refused to process what she was looking at, because the woman standing there was Dr. Priya Okonkwo Reyes, exactly as she'd appeared in the recording, down to the loose dark hair and the tired, steady posture, except the recording was 11 months old, and this woman was standing in front of them, breathing, blinking, very much alive. Priya, Reyes said, and his voice cracked clean in half on the second syllable. She turned toward them slowly, unhurried. The way someone turns when they've had 11 months alone to get used to the idea that turning towards sounds in the dark doesn't have to be an emergency every time. Danny, she said, and something in her face that had been flat and careful for a long time came apart at the edges into something almost like relief. You're late. You're supposed to be the whole crew, the report said. He couldn't finish it. Dead, she said, for him gently. Yeah, most of them are. Not because it hurt them exactly. I don't think it hurts anyone on purpose. I think it just held their attention, and they never got bored. And eventually, there wasn't enough of them left that was still paying attention to anything else to stay, I don't know, tethered to being the same shape as before. It's hard to explain. I've had 11 months to try to explain it to myself, and I still don't have better words than that. And you, Sable said before she could stop herself. You stayed the same shape. Dr. Okonkwo Reyes looked at her. Really looked. The unhurried, cataloging look of someone who had spent almost a year learning to notice things very carefully. And something like a smile touched one corner of her mouth. Ulvain, she said, you must be feeling it right now. The attention. It's stronger this close to the research bay. That's where the boundary's thinnest. She tilted her head slightly. I did stay the same shape, yeah. I got bored of it. Sounds insulting, doesn't it, considering everything it's capable of? But I ran out of new ways to be afraid of it around month 3. And it turns out that once you run out of new fear, you just default back to being a person. You start doing the dishes again, metaphorically. You start caring whether the tea's gone stale. And I think, more than anything else that happened here, that confused it. Genuinely confused it, like it had never encountered a mind that could just stop escalating. You're saying you survived by being bored at it, Reyes said, somewhere between horrified and disbelieving. I'm saying I survived by being human at it, Priya said. which best I can tell mostly means the same thing. She glanced past them, down the corridor, toward the research bay where the low hum was strongest, and for the first time something wary crossed her face. It knows you're here now, by the way. All three of you. It's been quiet the whole time I've been alone because I stopped being interesting 8 months ago. New people are interesting again. I'd very much like to be off this station before it decides how interesting. Then let's go, Reyes said immediately, already reaching for her arm. There's a problem, Priya said, not moving. The data. Everything we found out about it. Every log, every reading. Everything that could actually help the next crew, the next ship, whoever comes here after us, and doesn't have 11 months to relearn it all from scratch. It's all stored in the research bay's core, and the core doesn't have a remote backup. Because 6 months in we lost the ability to trust our own transmissions off station. Things we sent out kept coming back changed. I stopped trying to send anything at all after that. She looked toward the research bay again, and Sable felt her own nerve lines twist harder. That slow, rolling attention pressing closer, curious, patient, and entirely too aware of all 4 of them standing in its hallway. If we leave without it, everything we learned dies with this station. Every crew after us starts from 0. Maybe they get lucky, maybe they don't. Reyes looked at his sister, then down the dim corridor toward the research bay, then at Sable, whose nerve lines were rolling harder now, faster, that spoon-stirred sensation sharpening into something with an edge to it, something that felt, unmistakably, like being noticed. How long to pull the core? He asked. 20 minutes, maybe less if nothing's degraded, Priya said. But Danny, the longer we're in that room, the more interesting we get. All of us, including you. You've been afraid since the moment you walked in here, and I know you. I know exactly how long you can hold on to being afraid before you start looking for something else to do with your hands. And that's... She almost laughed, but it caught in her throat instead. That's the whole trick. That's the only thing that's ever worked on this station. So I need you to trust me on something, and I need you to not ask why until we're back on your ship. What? I need you to be bored, Priya said. All 3 of you. As fast as you possibly can. Whatever's in that room, whatever it shows you, whatever it does, I need you to find a way to stop being afraid of it before it finishes deciding what to do with that fear. Can you do that? Reyes looked at Sable. Sable looked at Core, whose 6 eyes had gone very still, watching the dark end of the corridor with the specific patience of a species that had never, in its recorded history, needed to run from anything. And Sable understood, with sudden and complete clarity, that whatever Dr. Priya Okonkwo Reyes was about to lead them into, none of them were going to walk out of it feeling like the same shape of person who'd walked in. 20 minutes, Reyes said, and drew his sidearm not because he thought it would help, Sable realized, but because holding something familiar in his hand was itself a kind of boredom, a kind of ordinary, a small, stubborn refusal to let the moment be anything other than a job with a countdown on it. 20 minutes, Priya agreed, and led them into the dark toward the research bay, toward the low, patient hum that was, Sable understood now, not machinery at all, and had never been machinery, and was, somewhere behind that door, in the process of deciding with great and terrible interest exactly how it felt about being watched back. Core fell into step just behind Sable, all 6 eyes forward now, none watching the corridor they'd already cleared. For what it's worth, it said, in that same flat, unhurried tone it used for everything, structural failures and small talk alike. Threll do not experience boredom the way your species describes it. We experience patience. I have been patient with far worse than a curious anomaly. I intend to be patient with this one too. That's the same thing, Reyes muttered. You're just describing the same thing with better manners. Perhaps, Core said. Perhaps that is the whole secret. Perhaps it does not matter what you call the door, only that you find a way to walk through it without asking it to be smaller than it is. Priya ahead of them let out a short, surprised laugh, the first unguarded sound any of them had heard from her since they'd found her. And for just a moment, the corridor felt less like the throat of something ancient, and more like 4 people walking together toward a job that needed finishing, which Sable understood with sudden clarity was probably the entire point. The door hissed open. Nobody in the corridor said anything for a long moment. And then, from somewhere in the dark ahead of them, in a voice that wasn't quite a voice, something asked them a question that none of the four of them would ever fully agree afterward on the exact wording of, though all four of them agreed, without needing to discuss it, that the safest thing anyone could do was pretend they'd found the question boring.